is Alana Corey, and I'm going to be explaining question 1 from Exam 2 in CSE 2 Spring 2014 semester. The question we're going to look at consists of two main parts, the first of which is constructing the actual loops. And these loops are actually known as nested loops, which we'll get into a bit later. And then the second part of this question is generating an output from these loops. So the question reads, given the screen output provided on the left, construct loops or nested loops that generate the output. Here's a little close-up look on the question. So basically what we see here is a running number stack going from 0 to 9. And it increases between 0 and the number 4, or row 5, and it decreases from row 6 to 9, or the number 5 to 9. So it kind of creates a kind of interesting triangle figure that we need to figure out how exactly we can construct a loop that would increase and decrease to create this shape. So how do we construct a for loop? The for loop has three parts. The first is an initial action that initializes the control variable. So this sets where the loop is going to start. So let's say, for example, I wanted the loop to start at 0. Then I would start as for int I equals 0, which sets our for loop and the initial action. The second part of the for loop is known as the loop continuation condition. Basically, this determines how many times this loop is going to be repeated until what number it should stop. So let's say, for example, I wanted the loop to repeat 9 times. I would then write I is less than 10 as my initial action had declared I, and then the loop would repeat 9 times going up to 10, but less than 10 because it's not less than equal to 10. But if, of course, you wanted it to be 10, as well as including everything before, you could make it I is less than or equal to 10, but for simplicity reasons, we're going to keep it as I is less than 10. So we're going to have this loop repeating 9 times. And then the third part is executed after each iteration and is used to adjust the control value. So this is used to either increment or decrement the value of the initial action. So let's pop this question into Cloud 9. So we have to first declare our class and our main method. Our main method is our public static void string args, and our main class is loops. So we also want to make sure we close these off so we can properly note and not lose track of our brackets. So after we finish our comments and making sure everything is in place, we're going to start to work on our next part of our code. It's going to be the for loop, and it's actually going to be the exact same for loop I had discussed earlier in the video. So we're going to declare our initial int I is equal to 0, and then I is less than 10, so we want it to repeat 9 times. Finally, we're going to increment it. I is going up. It's increasing the initial action. So then we're going to close off our loop, and we're going to begin to type inside of this for loop. So what's the point of this for loop? The point of this initial for loop is that it's going to be the sequence from 0 to 9. And what I mean by the sequence from 0 to 9 is how it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now that we see that this first for loop is going to be in charge of the sequence from 0 to 9, we need to also figure out how to control it. So the way we do this is by using another for loop, and this for loop is going to help print the rows. So let's look at this for loop. We're going to start at int j is equal to 0. That's where we're going to start it all out. And then we're going to have j is less than I plus 1 and then j plus plus. J is less than I plus 1 means that j will iterate the initial int I plus 1 every time since it is controlling the rows of the loop. So what we are looking at really is a nested loop. The outside for loop, or int I, controls everything within it. So the j for loop is in complete control from the I for loop. This is important when using variables within one another. So I would be able to say I is less than j in the inner for loop. However, if I were to put j in the outer for loop, I'd get a compiler error. So let's start printing stuff. The first thing we're going to print is the actual number, which is I. So I'm going to comment really fast that we're going to print the number with this statement. And what this is doing is taking I, which is in the outer for loop, and we're taking it, which actually controls the sequence of printing from 0 to 9, and putting it in a print statement. The next system out print statement we're going to do is going to be printing the lines. So this is going to be printing lines and spaces and making sure everything is in that nice little side pyramid shape. It's also helping print the rows. But now we hit our first roadblock. Oh no! This is where I would make my first mistake. I would write out my for loops, put out my print statement, but then I would go ahead and try to compile it. And we clearly see that nothing is printing after I compile it. So why is that? We're actually forgetting the most important part of this entire program. We are forgetting that in this statement that we've written, that it increases until 4 and then decreases after that. So that's something that we need to add into our statement if we ever want it to work. It's a problem that most people will probably face because it's not something that we initially think off the bat. So what I recommend when doing this problem is looking at it, seeing where the values increment and decrement, and that is the way that we can tell where this problem is going to start to go, what direction we need. So when you get this problem or a problem that has to deal with number stacks or triangles or whatever you will get on the exam, is to take a moment and look what patterns can you see and identify, because that will help you out. So we're going to do this problem through an if statement because we want it to say if it is less than this number or greater than this number, we're going to separate it. So the reason why we do it above the for loop is because we want the rows to print based on the if statement. When the if statement is controlling the inner for loop, we can control when the rows increase or decrease. We also want to make sure I is less than or equal to 4 because it goes to 4 as it increases and then it decrements after 4. So let's pop this into the compiler and see what happens. Yay, we did it halfway. So now we see that we have half of the code done. And guess what? The hard part is over. All we need to do is from 5 to 9, which is just the reverse of what we've been doing. So let's write this second half. The first thing we're going to do is write an if statement. That's the opposite of the first one. So if I is greater than or equal to 5. And this basically counteracts the I is less than or equal to 4. Now we're going to start our loop. For int j is equal to 0, starting again like our first for loop in the first if statement. Then it's j is less than or equal to I. I'll get into that in 1 second. And j plus plus because we're incrementing it like every other for loop. We're going to do the exact same print statement as before. We're printing I, but we're printing out the numbers again, and we're also printing out the spacings using system out print ln. The j is less than 10 minus I ensures that we don't go past 9 in the final printout of the statement. So let's pop it into the compiler and see what happens now that the entire program is done and ready to be compiled. So when we put it in, it works out perfectly. We have that perfect triangle going from 0 to 9, perfectly balanced out before the 4 and after the 5. And we did it! What aspect of Java language is the question focused on? Really, this question is focused on nesting for loops, controlling for loops with spaces, as well as patterning with for loops, such as the triangle that we made. Also, by practicing boundaries set by loop continuation conditions, which is the middle part of the for loop, we gained a deeper understanding of how manipulating that middle part would result in a shape that is uncommon and different than almost every other kind of for loop. So it gave us that deep practice, and it really helped clarify that sort of part of the Java language. We used j is less than I plus 1 and j is less than 10 minus I in this program. A misconception I had for this problem is that I thought there would be only 3 for loops. One was to control the printing, one was to control the rows, and then the third for loop, which we did not have, which we did not need, was to control the increasing and decreasing of the rows from 4 to 5 and then downward. But it was really just a simple if statement on both parts, and I don't think I would have realized that unless I plugged it into Cloud9. One of my biggest study tips for this exam, for all of their exams, is to plug it into Cloud9 and have it as like your study companion, because using these exams, yes, you're supposed to be able to handwrite them all, but when you put it into Cloud9, it really gives you a very clear perspective of whether or not your thought process is correct. Another misconception I had was doing J minus minus in the second for loop. I thought that perhaps I would do it because it was 0 to 4 and then it was 5 to 9, and I thought, oh, because it's going from 5 to 9 and the rows are decreasing, the amount of numbers in each row is decreasing, I would do J minus minus. That was a mistake, and I found that out by plugging into Cloud9. So again, that is my biggest tip. Always plug into Cloud9, and that is something that you can really use to help avoid that mistake. And I also think that you can avoid that mistake by looking at your previous problem or your previous set. So when I changed it to J++ again, I did it to mirror the first for loop. And when I mirrored the first for loop, it worked out. Because when I did J minus minus, it was just a minor disaster. So again, Cloud9 is your best friend, and just put it in there. But practice makes perfect. I ended up creating this problem after I finished the one I showed you in the video to practice. It was really challenging to add in more components of which I've learned, and it really helped me get a deeper understanding of what I did and why I did it. This question specifically makes you add in another for loop because that for loop would control the spacing. And I think it's really important for someone to try this problem because it really does give a difficult variation of what we solved before. Mainly because where does your for statements belong that control the spacing before the numbers start? Is it before both the if statements? Is it in the less than 4 if statement and the greater than 5 if statement? It's something that would really test your knowledge, and I think it's a great problem to try. And even on the practice exams, there's a lot of questions similar, such as the Fall 12 exam. This is also a for loop question that is difficult and challenging. That's available to you. And if we go to the Fall 2013 exam, I believe it's the third question, right here. This is a for loop, but it also has the if statement component because if it's less than 3, it only iterates once. So that's kind of a cool thing, is that this specific problem also brings in some of the stuff that we did today. Finally, in the Fall 2012, there is another question like this, and I believe it's one of 2. This is a very similar one. It's creating the same sort of pyramid like we did through 0 through 4, but it's repeating numbers and jumping numbers. My best advice for studying for this exam in these specific for loop, nested for loop problems that create a pattern is just to keep looking for different variations. On page 194 in the textbook, there's actually a lot of different variations that you can try. I recommend going through all of them. Honestly, the more practice, the better you're going to get, and it really just makes you more and more familiar. Try those questions that I showed you. Try making your own fun little patterns in your head, and then see what happens when you type them out, because even if you don't get them right away, it's probably really hard to get them. But the more that you willingly try and put the effort in to see what spacing and what for loop controls what, you will create a deeper understanding. So thank you. My name is Alana, and this is CSC 2.